Hello everyone! In today's video, we are talking about a very important Pandas concept, and that is the Dataframe index. So if we come over to our Jupyter notebook, we have a Dataframe already loaded, already cleaned, and already filtered called Postings Cleaned Filtered. And when we look at the first few rows of this data frame, we see that it contains information about job postings. And we filtered it down to just data jobs. Now, if you want to see how we did all that, you can watch the last 3 videos in the series. So when we print out the first few rows, you'll see here there is a numeric label for each of the rows, and that is known as the data frame index. An index is just the row identifier for a data frame, and each data frame has one, and it always defaults to a numeric index. So for our data frame, you'll see it right here. Now we don't have to just keep this default numeric index for the data frame. We can set another column to be the index if we want to instead. Now the column that we set to be the index doesn't have to be numeric, and it doesn't have to just contain unique values, although it is helpful if that column already uniquely identifies a row. So for our data set, one column that we could use to be the index is the job ID column. So to make that the index, we would take our postings cleaned and filtered data frame, and we would run the .set index function on it, and to the set index function we would pass the name of the column we want to set the index to, in our case job ID, and then this function also takes that in place parameter, which we will set to true so that it changes the index of this data frame. So I'll run that, and now when we print out the data frame, you'll see that job ID has become the index. Now you'll notice how when we set job ID to be the index of the data frame, it disappears from the rest of these columns, and that's normal, that's what's supposed to happen. And you'll see that the name of the column that you're now using as the index is on kind of a different row than the rest of the columns. That's just indicating to you that this job ID column is now acting as the index of the data frame. It seems a little weird at first, but that's just how Pandas works. One reason we would set the index to be a specific column is because we may want to look up rows based on that column value. So in our case, if we wanted to look up rows by job ID, we could do that now since our job ID is the index of the data frame. Now that brings us to loc and iloc, which are both ways to select rows from the data frame based on the index. So the first thing I said there, iloc, uses the numeric index of the data frame. And the second thing I mentioned, loc, uses the label index of the data frame. So as an example, right now our label index for the data frame is the job ID. So we can use loc to access a row with a specific job ID. So let's take our data frame again, and we'll do .loc. Remember, this is how you access the rows of the data frame using its label index, and we'll give it this job ID. So when we print this, we get the row that has this as the job ID, and that is this job. So here the company name is PB Built, the job title is receptionist and data entry, and when we go back to our original data frame, you'll see that that's actually just the first row in the data frame. This is the job ID, and this is the information for that job. Now, even though we've set job ID to be the index of this data frame, that default numeric index is still there. So we can still use iloc to get information about different rows. So let's say we still wanted to get that first job. It had that job ID, but we can also get the first job in the data frame using iloc. And here, instead of specifying that job ID when referencing the label index, we'll now reference the default numeric index. So to get the first row in the data frame, we'll do iloc at 0. And when we print that, you'll see that we'll still get that first job again. Now you do have to be a little bit careful when setting an index and then using loc and iloc to access the rows based on either the label index or the numeric index. So in our data frame, the column that we set the index as was job ID, and the values for that are fairly large numbers like this. However, let's say instead of that, the job ID was just numbers starting at 1. In that case, when we do postings clean.filtered.loc at 1, that would give us the first job because the first job would have a job ID of 1. However, when we did iloc 1, we would actually get the second job in the data frame. And that's because this uses the default numeric index. And if we want the first job there, we have to do iloc at 0, not iloc at 1. So that's something that you just have to watch out for when you're setting another column to be the index. Loc and iloc will still can return different things at the same value. So if you're setting a label index to be something like that, that's where you'd have to be careful with loc and iloc, because you may expect loc at 1 and iloc at 1 to return the same thing, but they wouldn't in that case. If you watched the last video, in that video I had mentioned that we can also filter a data frame using loc. So here's how we would do that. If we wanted to get all the rows where the job is remote, we could do postings cleaned filtered .loc, and this time instead of passing a job ID, we will pass a Boolean condition. So here we'll do where postings cleaned filtered at remote allowed equals 1. So taking a step back here, in this code we are specifying a Boolean condition to loc so that it will return the rows where this Boolean condition evaluates to true. So in addition to specifying index labels, you can also specify Boolean conditions when using loc. So when we run that, we see that we get all the rows where remote allowed is equal to 1. Now this code is equivalent to running this code. You'll see the Boolean condition is the same. The difference is here we're filtering it using loc instead of just adding the filter inside these square brackets. You'll see data frames filtered both ways, both using loc and not using loc, but the situation where you'll see people using loc more is when you want to filter the data frame and you want to select some columns at the same time. So let's say we wanted to get all the rows where the job is remote and we just wanted to return the job title and whether it's remote or not. So to do that, we would take the code that we had before. So we had the .loc and we are specifying the Boolean condition. And in addition to this, after we specify the condition in between the square brackets, we can actually specify the list of columns that we want. So in our case, we want job title, and we also want remote allowed. So the first portion here selects the rows that we want just for remote allowed is true, and the second portion selects the columns that we want returned. So if we run this, you'll see we have job ID as our index, and then we get the job title and remote allowed. So these are the job titles for our remote jobs. Now, by the way, when I was learning Pandas for the first time, loc versus iloc was something that confused me for a while. So if it's a little bit confusing at first for you as well, that's totally normal. Just watch this example a few times and eventually it will stick. So we've talked about setting the index, we've talked about loc, we've talked about iloc, but let's say we actually don't want job ID to be our index anymore. Well, we are in luck because we can make job ID just a normal column again by resetting the index of the data frame. And we do that by taking our data frame and we run reset index. And this also takes that in place parameter, which we'll set to true, so that we reset the index on postings cleaned filtered. And when we look at the first few rows, you'll see job ID is just a normal column again, which you can tell because it's on the same level or row as all the other names of the columns. And you'll see our numeric index is here once again. It never really disappeared, but when we print out the data frame, when you've set the index, it'll show that column as the index instead of these numeric values. The last concept we'll cover in this video is multi-indexing. This is where more than one column serves as an index. So for our case, let's set the index of this data frame to be a combination of company name and job ID. So to set two columns as the index, we're actually going to use the exact same function. We'll still do set index. However, to set index, instead of just giving it one column name like we did last time, we just gave it job ID. We'll instead give it a list of columns. So the first would be company name, And the second would be job ID. And once again, we'll do in place equals true. Now, when we print this data frame, you'll see that company name and job ID are now on their own level. They're on their own row. The rest of the column names are up here. And you'll see that the index is now a combination of company name and of job ID. Now, we can also sort the index by either one of these columns. So let's say we want to sort it by company name. Doing this will help us see all the jobs available by company. So to sort the index, we'll use the sort index function. So we can take postings cleaned filtered, and we'll just do sort index. And when we print this, we'll see it's sorted. So you'll see that company name is sorted in ascending order. So it'll start with all the companies that start with like a numeric value, and then it'll go to company names that start with A. So you'll see here we have AT&T. AT&T has a couple of jobs listed. And then you'll see IO Associates has a couple of jobs listed as well. And you'll actually see that both of the index columns got sorted. So this got sorted first, and then within each of the company names, the job IDs are also sorted in ascending order. So that's how multi-level indexes work. Honestly, I don't use multi-level indexing that much, and I don't always set the index of a data frame to any of the columns. A lot of times I'll just use the default numeric index, but it's good to know how to do these things just in case you need to in whatever analysis you're doing using Pandas. So for our analysis on data jobs, we actually don't really need to set the index. So I will actually go ahead and reset the index of postings cleaned filtered. And it works the same way whether you set just a single index or a multi-level index. You run the same function. So that has reset our index. And just to show that it has, we will print out postings cleaned filtered, and you'll see we have that numeric index once again. All right, so that is it for indexes. If this video helped you understand indexes a little better, I would love it if you subscribed to the channel and liked and shared this video. And if you haven't already, if you want to know how we got the data frame to this point, how we loaded it, how we cleaned it, how we filtered it, make sure you check out the first 3 videos in this playlist so that you can be all caught up. In the next video, we are going to move on to some more advanced Pandas concepts. So we'll cover things like creating new columns and populating their values using apply. We'll talk about merging data frames together, and we'll talk about group by for subgroup analysis. This is where Pandas really shines and where the fun of data analysis begins. So I hope to see you in that video. See you there.